Has anyone else come out of Act 2 and completely lost the will to live? Well, that's been me for the last few days. I'm not even joking. When I say I've been depressed, I have been depressed. How does this show have such a hold on me? Somehow it both subverts my expectations and fulfills it at the same time, and I know I should have seen this coming because we had foreshadowing for the loss of Isha, but I really didn't expect this. And to be honest, as I've been thinking about it for the last few days, I've realized that this changes everything for Jinx. And I've come to a conclusion for my predictions of how I see this character resolving, and it's not looking good. In my last video, I said that I see a healing arc for Jinx, and while I'm not going to say I was wrong, I do see a tragic end as well. And you might ask yourself, how can her ending be both healing and tragic? Well, this is how I would write the character if I was one of the writers. And for her character, it just makes perfect sense. So let me explain my theory. In season 1, we saw the tormenting experience of her inner conflict between her identity as Powder and her identity as Jinx. By the end of season 1, we saw her fully embracing her Jinx identity, which most people interpreted as a solidification of her descent into villainy. If you watched my other video, you know how I feel about that. But what I haven't discussed yet is that I actually see that act at the very end of bombing the council as a multi-dimensional act. What makes it so dynamic for her character is that it is both healing and destructive at the very same time. On one hand, she is seemingly putting an end to her inner conflict by choosing to fully embrace her Jinx identity, but on the other hand, it's quite sad seeing Powder die within her. What if I told you that that decision was necessary for her to even have a chance at healing? We're gonna get philosophical in this video, so buckle up. Even when I first saw the end of season 1, her choosing to be Jinx seemed like a resolution to her inner conflict, but I knew that it wasn't the end. And this has been confirmed by her portrayal in season 2. We get to see for at least a while Jinx giving up on the idea of being Jinx. Without having Silco there to manipulate her and play upon her loyalty and affections, she actually gets to see things a little bit more clearly. She questions herself and her actions and her motives, and she tries to understand herself. We see a period of self-reflection and introspection for her. We see an emo, introverted Jinx who seems to have regressed back into not understanding who she truly is. Which makes perfect sense because, like I said before, her decision to sit in that Jinx chair and make that decision to bomb the council was a false resolution, merely a step in the direction of fully discovering her identity. It's absolutely fascinating in this show, the duality that they inject into every aspect of it, including Jinx's character. Because while she regresses as Jinx, she progresses as Powder. And that is mostly what we've been seeing in season 2, especially through her relationship with Isha. In season 1, we saw that Jinx was fully trying to sever her relationship with Powder, her inner child. Powder was the part of her that everyone rejected and hated. Milo called Powder useless, and the only person who actually truly esteemed Powder and believed in her was her sister Vi. But by the end of episode 3, we see that Vi also rejected Powder as well. Especially in childhood, this is incredibly impactful. When aspects of a child are rejected around everyone around that child, especially parental figures, that child will also reject those parts of themselves. In Jungian psychology, these rejected parts become what is known as the shadow, the parts of yourself that you have rejected so fully that you don't even know that they're a part of you anymore. But the more you are unaware of your shadow, the more it will control you. What we see with Jinx is that when she is in her Jinx state, she is suppressing Powder, and when she is in her Powder state, she is suppressing Jinx. Powder is sweet, but she's scared and insecure, unable to be empowered or take action on her own. Jinx is competent and rebellious and takes action and doesn't ask for permission, but she's also wild, dangerous, unpredictable, and chaotic. In essence, both of her states have aspects of her shadow. They basically take turns being her main personality versus her shadow based off of what she's rejecting in herself in that moment. And in many ways, Jinx is very moldable to her environment. what she really desires at the end of the day is to be loved. And that's true for any child. Any child will suppress certain parts of themselves if their environment doesn't like it or disapproves of it as a strategy to survive. Powder was so deeply traumatized and simultaneously condemned by the ones who were her caretakers that she basically had a dissociative split. And under Silco's encouragement to let Powder die and to embrace her identity as Jinx, she really continued to reject Powder through season 1. But with the absence of Silco's influence and the introduction of Isha, we get to see Jinx start to reconnect to Powder. However, this is not the only reason for the creation of Jinx, and I'm only going to be touching on a few because there are many that we could surmise. In addition to her rejecting Powder and becoming Jinx, Jinx was also created to protect Powder, ironically as well, because Vi failed to protect her. Now, I want to get into this in another video, but Vi failed Powder in many, many ways and continues to fail Jinx. But that's another video for another time. And what we see so far is the return of Powder, but this time it's different. It is more of a blend between the Jinx and Powder side of her. Instead of seeing a timid and scared little girl or a tragically traumatized and reactive tyrant, we see Mama Bear Jinx. However, despite this, we have been seeing Jinx under the surface, threatening to come out if she loses her mental stability, which is Isha. In order for Jinx to be stable, she needs to have someone in her life that she can be devoted to. This is also because her identity is very weak due to the trauma in childhood. In season 1, she was constantly looking for validation, almost to the point where it was insatiable. And at first, Silco only validated Jinx. He didn't validate the Powder part of her. He told her that Jinx is perfect, and we know his philosophy is to let the monster out to be free. And I'm going to tell you right now, Silco isn't fully wrong. When searching the internet for quotes from Robert Bly's book, A Little Book on the Human Shadow, I came across this blog post. It explains that every human has their own monster inside, and there are 3 strategies that humans use to deal with it. Number 1, rejection. We can try to pretend we are not monsters and try to not be monsters. Unfortunately, we are monsters, so this often doesn't work well. Number 2, inversion. We can revel in our monstrosity and give it full reign. We can rationalize and pretend not to care about the harm that it does to other people. And number 3, I'll reveal in a bit. Silco's strategy of inversion, embracing and reveling in the monstrosity, in my opinion, it is better than rejection because it is more self-aware. It brings the monster within to the surface to fully analyze it and see it in the light for what it really is. You cannot heal something that is hidden under the surface to your own self-awareness. However, it also is a coping mechanism. It is only a step toward healing and not full healing itself because it can cause damage to others. I would say rejection of the monster is the first stage because most humans never want to see the monster within, and most never evolve beyond this comprehension. But to stay in the stage of inversion where we fully revel and embody the monstrosity is not full healing. Full healing happens in the 3rd stage. The inversion stage is also a coping mechanism. And just like humans never evolve past the rejection stage, we can also get stuck in the inversion stage if we are afraid to face the pain of full healing. This is why every time Vi came back into her life, since she had been under Silco's mentality for so long, she experienced more mental illness. It was triggering the part of her that she had suppressed. Ideally, she could have used those triggers to face her past and actually deal with it instead of running away from it like Silco was training her to do. It is only at the very end of Silco's life that he seems to have a full healing, and it is too late to communicate it fully to Jinx at that point. I want to go into this more in another video because it's just, his arc is beautiful, and before he would say Jinx is perfect as he was rejecting Powder, but at the very end he said you are perfect. And I think it took her time to recognize the full meaning of this statement and his full acceptance of her. Vi, on the other hand, simply couldn't accept her sister fully. She could not accept Jinx. And I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Vi did fully accept Jinx and say, I understand that this personality is part of you. It's part of your experience. It's part of how you have been molded and shaped and created. and I accept that part of you. I love you anyway. I'm not saying the responsibility falls on Vi for Jinx's decisions in that moment. But what I am saying is that if Jinx was equipped with the ability in that moment to fully accept her shadow, she wouldn't have to be controlled by it. Silco finally accepted Powder, but Vi could not accept Jinx, and because of that, she was still rejecting Jinx within herself and being controlled by Jinx. Another part of the reason that at the tea party her mental illness comes to a head is because the two people she is devoted to have conflicting philosophies. And like I said before, Powder and Jinx are very much impacted by the people that they love and look up to. And at the tea party, having these two powerful influences on her identity contradicting each other brought her identity crisis to a head. In my last video, I erroneously said that Arcane is about having compassion for the underdogs of society, and I didn't mean that that was the entire theme of Arcane or even the main point. What I should have said is that that is one of the things we learn from Jinx's character. I think the point of Arcane is summed up very well in Victor's speech by the end of Act 2.
That which inspires us to our greatest good is also the cause of our greatest evil.
If we really think about it, love and attachment is part of what really drives Jinx's mental illness. Yes, it's trauma. Yes, it's a predisposition potentially. But it is also just part of her personality, to be so devoted to the ones that you love that you lose your sense of identity. And yes, she is prone to codependence, which isn't necessarily a loving thing and something that is meant to be overcome. However, her affectedness, her deep feeling, her devotion and sensitivity is a very good thing in many respects. And up until I saw the end of Act 2, I believed for a long time that the only way Jinx could ever heal is to accept both herself as Powder and Jinx. That brings me to the third strategy that humans use for the monster within: incorporation. We can embrace our monstrosity while cultivating our human nobility. We can allow each to transform the other so we become cheerful, kind, useful monsters who are also overpowering, unpredictable, and dangerous heroes. This is what we've been seeing in Jinx in Season 2, initiated through the catalyst of Isha. Continuing on this path, this is what would give her true peace, and in many ways would help restore her sanity. But the one person she has given her devotion to this season, the one person who has been rekindling her relationship with Powder, her inner child, the one person who has helped her to overcome her trauma to an extent where she is becoming not just absorbed in her own problems, but protective of others, dies. For anyone, the death of someone so close would impact their mental state, and I do understand that with Kate. The death of someone you love is a profound loss, but with Isha taking from her once again in such a traumatic way, we may very well see not just the loss of her nobility, but the loss of her humanity. Because that amount of trauma and tragedy is simply too much for one person to overcome. And to be honest, if she burns down Piltover and the whole world, I wouldn't even blame her. The death of Isha might mean the death of Powder. We are likely to see a full evolution of Jinx. She is gonna go full Jinx on everyone's ass. But the question is that really a bad thing? Jinx has done some of her most effective work for the cause of Zaun when she was her full, unhinged Jinx self. I think that one of the themes in this show is that our perception of what is bad is completely based on our biases. Yes, I am biased. You are never going to get an unbiased opinion from me because I am human, and you are biased as well. And one of my arguments for my passionate defense of Jinx is that the chaos of Jinx is needed in a society that is complacent like Piltover. We may not like how Jinx does things, but she does get things done. She is a catalyst for change, and that change can be perceived as good or bad depending on how you look at it. As someone who identifies with the suffering of the Undercity, I see it as a good thing. The things that happen to us, both positive and negative, is part of what shapes us to be who we are. We have some level of control over our destiny. However, we also don't have a level of control over who we become. But that doesn't mean that we are doomed and disempowered. The traumas that we experience being on this imperfect earth as humans is part of what stems our purpose. In life, negative is often seen as bad and positive is seen as good, but in reality, they are both in neutral terms, like the positive and negative charge of an atom. For a long period of time, Piltover has reached its innovations particularly because they oppressed an entire group of people. This is positive in one way, but negative in another. Like Heimerdinger said, for every action, there is a reaction. If only he could see how that applied to the politics of Piltover and Zaun. And Jinx's chaos is the start of a new era, the natural balancing of the scales. The force that an archer inflicts upon his bow when he pulls back the arrow to aim is the same force that will propel it forward. Our deepest pain gives us the potential for our greatness. And by the end of season 1, when Jinx fully embodies her Jinx identity and takes that attack against the council, she is claiming and healing the part of herself that she has so rejected. It is both a moment of triumph and defeat, which is why it is such a powerful moment. Because sometimes before you can accept your shadow and bring inner peace to yourself, you have to embody it. I won't deny it's a traumatized response, but sometimes traumatized responses are needed for healing. And maybe, just maybe, that's true for Kate as well. And in some ways, I would argue that the identity of Jinx is somewhat of an illusion. It is an internalization of what others have labeled her to be, and because of her internalizing that and believing it about herself, she has become it, making Jinx into a reality. Some people say that Jinx doesn't take responsibility for her actions, but I would argue that the opposite is true. She takes too much responsibility for things, and because of that, because she blames herself for everything, she continues to live out this Jinx level of self-sabotage.
It's always me. Whether I'm pulling the pin or not, everyone who gets close to me dies.
What she really needs, actually, is the moment from Good Will Hunting.
It's not your fault. I know. No, you don't. It's not your fault. I know. It's not your fault. All right? It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean. Not you. It's not your fault.
By recognizing what happened to her as a child was not her fault, and that all she can do is take responsibility in the time that she has now, in the moment. Because as we've been seeing in this season, she has had enough of a void, a space to really think about things and to finally become more self-aware. And as she's approaching adulthood, she is finally able to be mature enough to reflect on her actions. And this, I believe, is the foundation for her possible empowerment in Act 3. By accepting the shadow aspects, the rejected aspects of Powder, and the shadow and rejected aspects of Jinx simultaneously, accepting both sides of herself, having compassion for Powder, seeing that it wasn't her fault and forgiving herself, recognizing that it is a programming that happened in childhood for her to believe that everyone who gets close to her dies, and that she can create her own destiny for herself. Up until now, Jinx has lacked empowerment. She has been a victim of herself and others. Part of this is because Vi did raise her to be codependent, and I'll get into that in another video. But if you really look at Jinx's actions, whether she killed or didn't kill, whatever she did, it has always been for the love or the approval of another person. She is still acting within codependence, and she has never truly lived for herself. And the only way I see Jinx healing now, especially after Act 2, is her fully embracing and accepting herself, letting go of the desire to please or gain the acceptance of others, accepting the past for what it is, and living in the moment, realizing that she is the creator of her own reality. She has that power. That the past, although it will always affect her, she does not have to be fully defined by it. She can't go back to being Powder. She can't look backwards anymore. She has to move forward. And with losing Isha, she is losing the motivation that she would need to be this new person. And we all know that Isha was a champion for the rebellion. Once again, the one that she loves dies with the desire and hope for her to complete the cause of Zaun. And because of all of this, I believe that Jinx is definitely going to go full Jinx and finally embrace the role of the symbol of the rebellion. It would be ideal for her to integrate both Powder and Jinx into herself to form her new personality. But that would only be possible if she sees herself as worthy enough to become this new person. But this is Arcane, and you know it's never gonna be that happy. So I think a compromise between healing and tragedy would be her choosing to remain as Jinx, but for the first time choosing to do so through her own free will. For her to fully embark on life and break the codependence within her and finally live life for the first time on her own terms. Fully embracing her madness and never again apologizing for who she is. Or they could do what is very possible, but I think would be a very, very bad decision. They could kill her. I genuinely am not just saying this because I go hard for Jinx. I really truly believe that this would undermine so many of the important themes in the show. And quite honestly, I'm very tired of the damaged person receives redemption through death trope. Unfortunately, we are seeing foreshadowings of this, although I really don't want to see it. We have consistently seen that she's depressed and wants to die, but giving her death as a mercy sends so many wrong messages. Firstly, it undermines her character growth because she needs to learn that death is not the answer. For me, it makes sense for characters like Silco because it is more clear that they need that level of transformation, which death is the ultimate transformer, to change their character enough so that they can be redeemed. Jinx, on the other hand, is a conflicted character with good intentions who is simply a product of her environment. Like Katniss from the Hunger Games, she's never really wanted to be part of a rebellion. What she does is either out of love or trauma. Redemption through death isn't necessary for her because I personally believe she doesn't even need a redemption arc in the first place. She needs a healing arc, like I discussed in this video. I think that she has suffered enough from the consequences of her actions, which oftentimes weren't even done under her own free will or of any fault of her own. And even if we don't consider her trauma and mental illness, the things that she has done, in my opinion, furthered the cause of the Undercity. But the council voted that Zahn should be independent. Yes, I'm aware of that. But she wasn't. And do you mean to tell me that this independence of Zahn would fully fix the exploitation that Piltover was benefiting from? In the social and political context, this kind of thing was inevitable, whether it be Jinx or someone else. However, I know this show isn't the Hunger Games, and Jinx is not Katniss. The point of this message is not just social commentary on class divides. I understand that. I'm not saying that the point will be or should be to eat the rich. While it is amazing writing to write Jinx in such a way that not only does her society blame her, but the viewers blame her and scapegoat her as well, if they don't reveal where the true responsibility lies, which Jinx does have some, but in my opinion, Piltover has more, in her arc and that specific theme, they will have failed. The theme that everyone can become a monster in the right environment would be completely void. Along with this very important theme, Jinx is written way too sympathetically for her to be punished and redeemed through death. Even if we don't get a full destruction of the Piltover system, we do need to see them take responsibility. And they have never fully taken responsibility. By making Jinx the scapegoat and making her pay for those so-called sins, it validates the system that oppresses and creates monsters, and it also validates those who victim blame. And the way that the themes are developed and the story plays out, we see that no one is really innocent, no one is really the hero, and no one, of course, is the villain either. For those who commented on my last video saying, Caitlyn isn't a villain, thank you for falling for my clickbait. I uploaded that video the day before Act 2 came out, and I genuinely thought they were going to take Kate in a more dictator direction in Act 2, but they didn't. Which in my opinion is a missed opportunity. However, I know that Caitlyn would not be the antagonist this season the way that Jinx wasn't really the real antagonist in season 1. Silco more so was, and in my opinion, if we were going to choose anyone, it would probably be Ambessa. But now we know that the biggest threat is the Arcane. What is fascinating to me is that this show reveals your biases and prejudices. And despite any biases that you or I might have, the one thing we can agree on is that Piltover has been oppressing Zahn. That's just a damn fact. And by killing Jinx, not only does it undo all of the groundbreaking subversions of her character, but for her specifically, it would simply be tragic. I don't see a redemption quality to it. It would be just pure tragedy. And Jinx and the audience deserves better than that. The ending that we do deserve, I believe, would be this. Everyone comes together to fight the Arcane. Jinx uses one of her weapons and somehow appears to sacrifice herself to save everyone from the Arcane. While she's not the only one who takes on the arcane, she has some defining moment that makes her somewhat of a hero, sacrificing her own life like Isha did. Perhaps Kate is holding Vi back from protecting Jinx from doing this. And due to this, and maybe other ways as well, I'm sure that other people will have a part, including people like Jace and Echo. I know that Echo is supposed to have a time manipulation element, but maybe we could use that in a different way. So either Jinx fakes her own death or appears to be dead to everyone, including the audience. Due to her heroic effort and her self-sacrifice, Kate decides to forgive her and maybe even honors her like a statue next to Vander. Vi goes to pay her respects when all of a sudden Jinx comes out of the shadows. Vi is overwhelmed with joy that she's still alive, but Jinx comes to explain that she's simply saying goodbye. She says something about never really belonging here anyways, and that it's time for a new start. Only maybe less cheesy. I don't know, I'm not a screenwriter. Vi and Jinx tearfully forgive each other and say goodbye. And as Jinx walks away, Vi calls to her and says, "I knew you could do it." Jinx looks back in understanding and smiles, then turns around and walks forward, forging ahead to a new place and a new life on her own terms.